Near this evening. Before I turn the stage over to them, a couple of quick notes. We hope to have time for a short Q&A at the end of the reading, so post your questions for Jacqueline or Sarah in the Q&A bubble, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom box. And Kim Bissell, my business partner, will be monitoring those throughout the talk and will facilitate questions at the end. Kim will also be posting links to the author's books in the chat box if you want to purchase some more copies. And might I just add, books make wonderful holiday gifts. Broadway Books is currently open for in-store shopping by appointment only. Customers and employees are required to wear masks and hand sanitize, and we are cleaning surfaces frequently and have added an air purifying system to the store. The health and safety of our bookstore family, customers, and staff is a top priority to us. And during the holiday season, especially with Oregon's numbers on the rise, it's a particularly delicate balancing act. You can also purchase books online or over the phone and have them shipped to you or get them during our curbside pickup hours. You will find all the pertinent information for pickup and appointments on our homepage of our website, broadwaybooks.net. On the homepage, you'll also find links to many lists of books to browse, including staff picks, award winners. And tonight, the National Book Awards were announced, and Thursday, the Booker Prize comes out, and new and best-selling books by genre. As always, we are happy to gift wrap for free any purchases at our store. We are, I must admit, a little worried about the pandemic holiday situation. Usually at this time of year, we only have the weather to worry about, but this year we have the weather and all of the pandemic related issues keeping us awake at night. But we are committed to making it as easy and safe as possible for you to shop this holiday season. Please get your orders in early. As we get closer to the holidays, processing time will take longer and we will face more out of stock situations. So early, early, early is the mantra this holiday season. We are sincerely grateful to everyone who has continued to shop at Broadway Books during these challenging times, enabling us to stay open and to keep all of our staff on payroll. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And with that, let's get started. Jacqueline Winspear grew up in the county of Kent in England. After graduating from the University of London's Institute of Education, she worked in academic publishing, higher education, and marketing communications. In 1990, she moved to the United States, where she continued working in those fields, which is how I first met Jackie, and began writing for various publications. Her first Maisie Dobbs book was published in 2003. And because I know all of you are going to ask, the 16th book, 16th, that's just amazing.
I know.
16th book in that series, The Consequences of Fear, will be published in March. You will find a link to pre-order that book in the chat box as well. If you haven't yet read Jackie's memoir, This Time Next Year We'll Be Laughing, you will find a lot of Maisie in Jackie and vice versa. They are both rather observant and curious about people and their past and about human nature in general. They also both love deeply and are fiercely protective of those they love. In this memoir, you will learn about some of Jackie's fiercest passions: love of horses, of books and of writing, of her rural upbringing, despite its challenges and hard labor, and especially of family. It has been our honor to host Jackie at Broadway Books many times over the past few years, and while we are sad to be at a distance, we are thrilled to be hosting her again. We are also thrilled to welcome Sarah Maslin near to Broadway Books, albeit from a much greater distance. Sarah is a staff reporter for the New York Times. She has reported for the Times from around the world and was a finalist for the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Investigative Reporting. She earned her master's at the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. Although Sarah travels around the world, there is a common theme wherever she goes, and that is horses. She wants to know them, to know their stories, and to know the stories of their people. This passion for horses is what led to her recently published memoir, Horse Crazy, the story of a woman and a world in love with an animal. And with that, I will turn the mic over to our two avid horsewomen and fabulous writers, Jacqueline Winspear and Sarah Maslin Near.
Well, thank you so much. Sally, thank you for having this. I want to underscore your request that people shop early with people need to shop local. The Jeff Bezoses of the world and Amazon, we don't need to help them get any richer. We need to help places like Broadway Books stay alive and afloat because they do things like this for us, which is build community even when we're so fractured. And every book you purchase should be from a local bookseller. So please. But Jackie, thank you so much for reaching out to me to sit down and speak with you. You read my book and felt that we were kindred spirits and connected with me to do this. And I read your book after that and felt the same. And we couldn't have more different lives. But I think that is the amazing bridge that great writing can provide. And the writing in this is just sublime. It's
thank
really
you.
exquisite piece of art, and it's about place. I was just speaking before the call went live. We were just talking, and I said, it's almost not a memoir. It's a like I some neologism I could bastardize, that it's a place-war. You and the place are so inextricably linked.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to people? I don't know if everybody on the call read this, but talk to us about the place, and what the place is for you.
Well, first of all, I wanted to sort of reiterate what you said about, having sort of very different upbringings, and yet, these places of experience that mirror each other. And that's what I've always loved about reading memoir, is that the sort of the personal can become the universal. But regarding place, where I grew up, the county of Kent in England, it's in England's southeastern corner. And the particular area of Kent I grew up was very rural. Yes, there were sort of market towns, 20 miles away or whatever. But, when you don't have a car, it's an awful long way away. My parents did not come from that area. They came from London. They were sort of post World War II escapees, so to speak. But the land to me is just so exquisite. It's this sort of undulating countryside. We don't have mountains, we have hills. It's farms and small towns, small villages. Many of the houses in those villages go back to the sort of 13 and 1400s. And particularly when I was growing up, it was very, very agricultural. Hops was probably one of the main crops every year, and almost legendary, the hops and Kent, and apples, barley, and almost every fruit you could imagine, except not tropical fruits. And so this was a world that I was born into, a very very green world, a world where community was very tight, and yet you didn't have, no one was breathing down your neck, unless by the time you got to the teenagerhood, and then you thought everybody was breathing down. Everybody knew what you were doing, but it was
Oh, you froze. Did this freeze for everybody? Shoot. Now you're unfrozen. Okay, go on.
I've got a message saying unstable internet. It would be just my luck it's today. But yes, it was very cocooned. I felt very cocooned. And some years ago, I wrote, it was one of my novels called Elegy for Eddie, which was very much set in Kent. Kent appears in the books. But one of my friends said to me, "This is your love letter to Kent." And then when he read this again, he said, another, it's really your love letter to Kent. So.
This was pointed out when I read Wall Street Journal, glowing Wall Street Journal review, that this is you on the cover.
It is.
And those are hops in your hand. You were already at that age picking hops and hop vines. What's interesting to me is a tremendous part of your childhood you recount is being an agricultural laborer, but you never felt that you were working. It was always a deep pleasure. Even you describe the way the hop vines would scrape your hands, and the flannel you would have to have rubbed over these sores, and the Nivea put on the rubs.
Yeah, it scrapes you. The hop vine is very rough. And it can really scratch you if you get it across your skin. And the vine in Kent is always called a bine with a B.
Yeah.
And it wasn't unusual. You had whole families that went hop picking, and you have to keep an eye on kids, although most kids were allowed to run wild to a point. But one of the things you did is gave them a little basket and set them to work. And so they were making a contribution. And there was a certain atmosphere out in the hop gardens. And again, it's not a field, it's called a hop garden, where there was a camaraderie. So you heard other people talking. In fact, that photograph is the one that my dad always used to call me, say the photograph is the incredible soul. And I'd actually just been stung by a bee on my lip. And it was, it crawled out of a hop. And I can still see it now, so that's why I'm terrified of things that fly and sting. And it crawled out and straight onto my lip. And actually, someone pulled the stinger out.
Oh,
it didn't come up too much, but someone else had the bright idea of, well, let's take a photograph of her while she's in pain and miserable. But yes, I'm holding hops and, picking them into, you can just see in the photograph the handle of a basket, a wicker basket, and that would be tipped into a large bin, which the adults were picking into. Yeah.
So that sort of leads me to my next question, is that from a young age, yes, it was a diversion, but you were still laboring. I mean, when you bought not the Cinderella watch, but the other watch, you were a little girl making, really helping your family make ends meet. You had a spare family life. At times there was lots of want, and at other times there was more stability. How do you process that experience? I mean, some people could frame it as, as a lean existence and really hard for a child. What about you and your family enabled you to see it, this hard work and the spare life, as such a buoying, beautiful experience?
I think there was humor brought to it. There was always humor brought to it. My mom was a very quick wit. And I can remember once saying to her that I only ever did this the once, that I wanted something. You know how I want that. And I can remember her saying, now you know what it is to want, call it an experience. And it was like, I'm never going to say that word again. So and it was the Cinderella watch, when I wanted that watch, it was a case of, okay, you want it? We'll find a way for you to get it. But it's your wanting, it's not a need, it was a want. Therefore, if you want it, you've got to find a way to get it. And so that was the clue for me. And I think, we had our ups and downs as a family, but we were tight. We were quite a tight unit. So there was always this going forward together. We've all got to get stuck in, because we've got to get to whatever comes next together. We've got to get through this together. And sometimes, I looking back on it, I felt very, I think as a kid, something scared me, but there was, and also my parents' generation. And maybe I know with your experience with your father in particular, there's perhaps some understanding here. There were things you just got on with. You had to get on with, because what had gone before was so unbearable. Why moan about what comes next? You have to get on with it. You have to make the next step up, because it was always important to have to go to the next step up, to whatever up might be.
But history in the past still braided through your life, and we sort of touch on this in our emails. My father's a Holocaust survivor, and I often joke people are going to buy my book and say, why is there so much Holocaust in this book about horses? But it really sort of braided together, that's my life. And although your family was very resilient, they had some lasting scars and intergenerational trauma. I mean, you had a relatively safe childhood, but you write at one point, you were always woken up as a little girl under the bed. Talk about that.
Yes. And actually, you've got a line in your book that I really like, which was, so crisply is trauma transmitted through generations, which really spoke to me. My mother used to tell me lots of stories about her experiences in the war. And I was very young when she started telling those stories. Because we lived in a rural area, she wasn't a woman that had lots of friends or anything like that. And I think, I realized by the time it didn't take me long to figure this out, she needed to tell the stories. I suppose I was a teenager when I really got it. And so she was telling me, and I think she probably never realized how much I was taking those stories in, about bombings, about seeing the dead after a bombing, and about what her horrific experiences when she was evacuated away from London with her siblings. And occasionally you would hear at night, I'd lie in bed and hear in the distance a light aircraft. There was an airfield probably about 10, 12 miles away as the crow flies. I'm sure it was heading for that airfield, another one coming in. And I would hear that sort of propeller plane in the distance coming closer and closer. And I was convinced they were coming to bomb us. I was convinced it was the Germans. They were coming to bomb us. I would end up under my bed because I was sure we would all be dead by morning. And, I mentioned this in memoir that it was a few years ago, I read a book called War Child by a Professor Martin Parsons, who he founded the Institute for the Study of the War Child at the University of Reading in England. And he found through the research of the institute that an experience of war, particularly in childhood, takes 3 generations to work its way through the family system.
Oh, wow.
And I can believe it. And I think probably you had a similar experience, because I think I read in your book that there was always a fear that the Gestapo would come.
Yeah, I would conflate, these girls this is going to sound very strange outside of having anyone who's read my book, but the girls in the pony ring with these flaxen hair, I thought I couldn't tell them I was Jewish. I was afraid they were Nazis because of how they looked. I didn't, in a real way.
Yes.
But there's such an unforgettable scene in your book. I think you're waiting for your brother to be born, and you're being babysat by your grandma and grandpa. Is that the correct sequence?
Yeah, they were at the house. Yes.
And you have a little dolly, and you want to tell that what happened?
Oh, that was actually when we went back to London.
Sorry, we went back to London. Excuse me.
Yeah, we were living in the country, and I had a very bad accident in the home, and one thing led to another, and they thought, we live way too far away from anywhere here. We were living on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and so my parents decided to go back to London. And when we got back there, and this was into sort of the late 50s, early 60s, housing was still at a premium because so much housing had been bombed during the war. And so we were living with my grandparents. This little interlude in London did not last long, mainly because of me. So I'm a little girl, and my parents were both working. Both went back to their old jobs. And so after Mum had gone to work, I was left with my grandparents. And I remember this, I as if it were yesterday, sitting at the table at lunch. We had our lunch. And I asked if I could get down like a little English girl. May I leave the table, please? And I began running around with my doll. And it was a doll that had a sort of some sort of plastic or some other face. And then the rest of it was a stuffed toy, and beautiful little cherub lips and eyes, had been painted on. I'm running around like, waving my doll around, and, like little kids, screaming or whatever. And I remember being very aware that my grandfather, who had seen action in the First World War, he was shell-shocked, gassed, and had severe leg wounds. And I remember him becoming more and more agitated, and his eyes getting very wide and shaking. But of course, you're a little girl, so you just carry on doing what you're doing. And then he suddenly grabbed my doll, lifted his knife from his plate, and it, with a guttural cry, stabbed her in the head time and again. And then he threw the doll along the passageway towards the front door. And of course, I went running after it. But I can remember looking back at him as my grandmother came toward me with the usual sort of, we're going to make Dolly all better. We're going to, we're going to put a Band-Aid on that, etc. And seeing my grandfather and the tears streaming down his face.
Wow.
And I could not have put words to it at the time, but I think it was the first time I ever felt empathy and was aware of a new emotion, because I felt so sad for him. I felt sad for him because I knew that there was, and as I say, I had no words to articulate this, but there was something very sad in Granddad.
Well,
And it was, and of course later on, I knew what had happened to him.
well, that's just such a credit to how you were raised and the tightness of your family, that you could easily have a rage reaction to him, but you, even as a little girl, you had empathy. And then the scene I was conflating is when they came to you and you witnessed your father massaging your grandfather's legs,
Yes.
and you realized that even many, many years after your grandfather's wounds, um, your father was still pulling out little bits of shrapnel from his legs decades later.
Yes.
That scene was so powerful. And I mean, what a metaphor for the embeddedness of trauma, like we're talking about. But I don't want to get too sad because the book is so lovely and uplifting. But these are things you really navigate so beautifully. One thing I really wanted to ask you, Jackie, is you talk about being from the countryside and growing, but you're not. Your parents are from London. And then one day they kind of up and ran off with the traveling people. And
Yeah.
just
Well,
I mean, they were so edgy. Where did that come from? They were real. They were adopted by the Romanis, the gypsies, really wholeheartedly, and seen as part of the community.
that, I think there was a couple of things. They didn't have a lot of options. They were a young married couple in London living with my dad's parents, which wasn't down too well with my mother at all.
Mm.
And I think my grandmother was a little bit nosy into their private life, so
Mhm.
that really did rankle with her. And they absolutely wanted their own place. And I tell the story of how they couldn't get their own place because there was always a hell of a line in front of them when they signed up to get even a couple of rooms. And then one day they saw this advertisement for a gypsy, as we would say, a gypsy caravan. You would call it a trailer, and a very small space, and so they borrowed the money and they bought it, and they had it towed to a farm where my father's family had every year gone hop picking. Hop picking was the sort of traditional summer holiday of working class London folk, well, particularly from that part of London, the East End and Southeast London. You could keep working, you see. You had a holiday, but you kept working.
Mm.
And so they went down to this farm, and the farmer said, well, yes, you can put the trailer there, and you've got work probably for the next couple of months, and then you're going to have to, and obviously it's a time when there's not as much work around. And the closest people to them were Romani gypsies. And first of all, it started off as this good morning, good afternoon, and so on. And then slowly it became something more than that. And particularly that first winter when, my mum was inside their caravan, which is called a vardo in the Romani tongue. And this woman knocked at the door and said to my mum, I know you two are starving for want of food. You don't have any money. Come on, you can't do that. I'm going to show you how to make money.
Mm.
And she took my mum into her own, caravan and showed her how to make paper flowers and put them in a big basket and how to sell them door to door.
Mm.
And so soon there was my mother, who had been the first person in her London neighborhood, first young woman to wear the new look, just above the ankle after the war, and was very stylish. And the next thing you know, she's got a big colorful skirt on, and a scarf, a colorful scarf around her big hair. She had a lot of chestnut hair and big hooped earrings, and she could really do the dialect, which I am not even going to try to do, but she could really do it, and with some smattering of language as well. And she would go selling flowers door to door.
I think
And
that really. Oh, sorry.
and so I think what that spoke to was that they pretty much came to the point where they would do anything. And that certainly stayed. That was something that was inculcated with my brother and I, that if you want a job, you'll do anything.
Mm.
Obviously within reason.
But I also think it's about adaptability, and I think it's
Yes.
why they were able to weather a lot of different adverse conditions, a lot of different professions, and why they kind of bootstrapped it along, which I think that's also a character that Maisie shares, a character. But they really had incredible adaptability and resilience. I want to talk. Your mom suffered her whole life from Graves' disease, and I think it's such an interesting name for a disease. I was really hung up on Graves because both grave condition, you know, it
Yes.
has that, and then the specter of the grave, right? You would
Mhm.
hug your mother and you'd feel when
I'd
she
feel her
cuddled you,
bones.
you'd feel her bones.
And they would, so because, and you know, a bag of bones holding you is, you know, it's kind of uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
she had this friend that she worked with on the farm, Auntie Glad, we called her. Her name was Gladys, and she was a big lady and had a lot of soft places. And I used to love it if she put her arms around me, because I kind of used to sink into this different kind of body. And I think it must have, I think, because my mom was she was quite big on hugs, and I think it you know, when you just wriggle away a bit or something, must have hurt her. But what's funny, you know, this is the whole thyroid issue is something that ran in the family. And just since one of my cousins got in touch with me, who I hadn't heard from for a good number of years, and so, by the way, I've got the family thyroid thing as well. You know, so but it is Graves' disease. It's you know, an overactive thyroid. And I think it is a very grave disease. Some thyroid conditions you can't necessarily see in another person, but that's one you definitely see. It's you know, she was quite a tall. She was taller than me. She was good 5'9.5", something like that. And I think at its worst, I don't even think she hit 100 pounds,
Oh, wow. Wow.
something like
Well,
that.
what's so interesting is she's such a larger than life character. She's this great witch. She's a storyteller. Now, you know, looking back as you got older, maybe all her stories of you know, getting in little dust ups in the village were maybe a little embellished, because she embellished some about you. But she was so sharp. And I just, that juxtaposition between her diminishing physicality and her huge character was so interesting. But you also had a ailment, which for a writer is so uncanny. It was noticed when you were very tiny that you were reading like this.
Yeah, I know.
And
Like
you
that.
were so worried about wearing the dunce cap.
Yes.
Talk to us, because you do not
Well,
wear
it
the
was
dunce cap. I want
it
to
was
tell you.
it was I think a lot of kids were threatened with this, that if they didn't do well at school, they'd have the dunce cap. And in fact, some classrooms even had it. There's a pointed, almost like a witch's cap with a big D on the front. And if you didn't do well, you'd stand in the corner with the dunce's cap on. It looked like something out of Harry Potter, you know. It was the big D. And yeah, I had trouble with reading because I could see, and it still happens sometimes. To tell you the truth, I could probably do with having it done again, but there's no way I'm going to do that at this age. But it was corrected through exercises and surgeries. But I would look at things like this, and so I could only look through one eye, because if I looked through two, then I could see double. And it meant that as I was reading on the page, all the words would run into each other, which meant I fell behind in my reading. And if there's one thing that you didn't want to do with my mother, was fall behind with your reading. She was a voracious reader, and you had to be good at reading. You know, what you reading before you go to school, you had to, you know, it was really super important. It was really important to my mother that we do well at school. And both my brother and I had my brother had a hearing problem, so he had some issues. But yeah, that the whole eyes thing was, you know, I think it was only later that I realized how much it hurt me, actually. You know, the fact that, you know, having to wear an eye patch in school, it's, you know, when you're a kid, it's like, oh wow, everybody, what are they going to call me? Long John Silver? Where's your parrot? Did you leave that behind? You know, there's also that, and also that not fitting in anyway, because I absolutely never felt that I fit in. And I think that's probably something we share from school days and so on.
Yes, for very different reasons. But one world in which, and maybe this is my predisposition, because I'm such an animal person, but I felt that one world that you really inhabited so easily was the world of animals. And you start the book with such a loving description of your dad's passion for his dog Bess, you know, and
yes,
right, and I think there's even a picture of her in the back, and almost like the animals in the book are characters, and even the unnamed ones, your father would take you on walks and point out the badger's set and, the squirrel. What is that through line? And then it really translated also into horses, which you made part of your identity with your own bootstrapping again. Talk to us about the connection with animals.
I don't know. I was going to say, well, it's because I was raised in the country, but I don't think it is just that, because a lot of people grow up in the country and they maybe have a dog or a cat and then that's it. But
Well, they take them for granted.
Yeah, taken for granted. But a lot of that definitely came from my father. He loved the natural world. We loved animals. He would always point out animals. And in fact, yes, there's the wonderful story of Bess. There's the story he loved to tell about his own father with his horse, the one that he wouldn't let go up the hill twice. And
tell that story. It's such a good story. I love that one.
Oh, my grandfather. Well, my grandfather was a costermonger, a man who sold fruit and veg from a barrow. They called it a barrow even when it was a cart, in the costermongers. But anyway, he had a horse and a cart. And one day on his rounds, one of his customers said to him, Mr. Winspear, I would like you, I need some furniture taken over to my daughter's house. Would you do it at the end of your round? Oh, yes, ma'am, doff cap. And it was a way to make some extra money. So he goes round to her house, loads up the furniture, which probably amounted to a table, some chairs, something like that. And he went on his way, and there was an incline that he had to go up. And he gets close to the top of the hill and he's stopped by a policeman who said, and where are you going with that? The idea that a lowly costermonger going along with furniture must be stolen. Mm-hmm. So and my grandfather explained. And so click, clop, the policeman makes him walk all the way back to the house, where the lady tore the policeman off a strip and said, of course I've asked Mr. Wint, how dare you, my man? And the policeman said to my grandfather, well, you can go on your way, by which time my grandfather was, taking his horse out of the traces. And the policeman said, what do you think you're doing? He said, you know what, my horse has walked up that hill once and he's had to walk all the way down again with a full load, and I'm not walking him up there with a full load, you're bringing it up to me. And he literally got his horse and he just walked off to the top of this hill and stayed there with his horse, who enjoyed a nose bag of oats and was right next to the trough. And along came a clutch of policemen dragging his cart up the hill.
I love that story.
And as my dad always said, even in the 1920s, yes, there were cars in central London. You didn't have to go far out of, say, the West End, the London that everybody thinks of, to get to a point where there weren't cars, where it was still all horses and carts, and every street had a horse trough, and so my dad loved to tell that story. He loved to tell stories of his animals. And it's funny, even today, my brother is a great one for rescue. I mean, he rescued a rat a few weeks ago, a baby rat. I've actually got this photograph of my big brother with this rat on his arm. I kept thinking, I really hope that rat leaves home soon, because his wife's going to go nuts. And then it's Roland,
So I want to ask a couple questions about process, because that's always really fascinating for me personally to hear from another writer. But then I want to open it up to audience questions. And I get the sense that a lot of people are fans of Maisie herself. So I'll leave the Maisie questions to them, and I'll ask you the more autobiographical ones, because I'm a fan of the two of you.
Well, thank you.
So I was interested in some of the literary devices you used, where on 125, you're talking about a friend who taught you how to do sign language. And then you stop and you address the reader and you say, funny, I just stopped writing because I wanted to see if I could still sign Wendy's name with my fingers. And I can. And I thought that was so interesting, because this isn't just the story of you then. You're very much in the now, telling it and reflecting back. Can you talk about your process?
It's interesting, because time and place fascinate me in writing, and especially how we use time. And how can I put this? It's because it just sort of comes naturally to me to do things like that, as if I'm in conversation with someone. That chatting away, and I just did that, and I find that I can still do it. Because I think when we remember, we also loop back to now. We're in the here and now, and then we have this rememory. We go back, but then we're swept into now because there's something that happened here and now that made us remember, or there's something in the remembering that brings us back to here and now. And to me, it was the most normal thing in the world to think about, Wendy teaching me how to sign her name, and then I wonder if I can still do that, and then sharing that with the reader. And there's something immediate about it.
Yes.
And I think what it does, it's this point where the past comes into the present, because we're in the present when we're remembering the past.
Yeah.
So there are several occasions in the book where I'm very much in the present, but it's the present that's taken me into the past, or the past that's suddenly come into the present. And I don't sit and think, I'm going to write like this. It just comes naturally to do that. Just
beautiful.
It's the only way I can describe
so
it.
Effective. It's a really effective device. And then I think my final question will be, as a journalist myself, when I set out to write my book, I pitched it to Simon & Schuster as really an almanac of people obsessed with horses around the world. And I think I even wrote in my pitch, this isn't my story. This is the story of horses around the world. And they were like, no. It's your story, and why these animals have been so compelling, and these people's stories that I collected in my reporting and travels. And so I ended up writing quite a bit about myself, more than I ever would have ever expected. And also I'm forbidden to, as a journalist in my New York Times life, I never use the word I. So this is your big foray into the word I. And
it is,
some vulnerabilities you reveal, as much as you admire and love your mother, it was a fraught relationship. There were hard times. How did you get brave?
How did I get brave? I'm not quite sure how I think I was taking miniature runs at it for a long time, a bit like, okay, I'm going to take a little run at this. And I did it through the personal essay, and but so I've done contributing to blogs and so on and so forth. And when something, for example, has happened, could be nationally or internationally, and there is that time loop, there's something that reflects into my family or my experience, I've been able to write about that. So again, it's that personal to touch the universal. So I took these little runs at it. And I actually wrote a form of a memoir about 26 years ago. And
wow.
But it wasn't right. It was, I sometimes feel as a writer, what I've got is clay on the wheel. And then I'm trying to work it into the shape where I want the words to be. And I just couldn't get to where I wanted the words to be. And I suspect that I couldn't have done it until my parents passed away.
Yeah.
To really get, even though, they were so, because they both appreciated being brave, leaving home base, they would have said, great, Jackie, go for it. If that's what you need to say, that's what you need to say. I once wrote something about my grandmother that several aunts immediately phoned my mother and complained. And she said, Jackie's a writer, it's what she does.
Oh, wow.
And so even though she might have thought, I wish she hadn't have written that, Jackie's a writer, it's what she does.
That's wonderful.
So
they have the saying, good memoir always comes late. When everybody's gone, when everybody's dead.
Yeah. And I was eventually able to write the memoir that I wanted to write, and taking this piece and I think, it was just a case of, I took miniature runs at it over time, it's a bit practice runs, let's see if I can, I started with the trotting poles and I worked up from there.
Well, this truly soars. You've done it.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. So let's take some questions. I'm going to push you guys to ask more questions, because as a journalist, all I do is ask questions, and I love when somebody helps me out and I get to think new thoughts. So we've got a couple. here's from one from Ann Phillips. What kind of books do you like to read, and what are you currently reading?
What am I currently reading? Well, we know what landed today. I bought Barack Obama's memoir, but I looked at it and I said to my husband, this is like the Bible, you can read it first. But I've actually been rereading your book because I wanted to, and I've also been I like when I'm driving, I like to listen to an audiobook, and I love listening to Louise Penny's books on audio. And I think it's because I've got a bit of a crush on the guy that reads them. The narrator is just terrific. What do I read? I've got a real a very broad spectrum of interests. I'm currently reading a couple of books on women and national security. Actually.
Wow.
I know it interests me, the lives of women and how it impacts national and international security. You know, I'm just curious about it. So I think all sorts of things, but I do like a good thriller, and I like a good story. And funnily enough, I was just talking to one of my aunts. Well, she's one of my two remaining aunts, and she's 91, wow. Going nearly 92, and complaining because the library has now closed again, and she cannot get down the road to the library. And she said, so I'm going to have to reread some of my books. And I said, well, let's think. I said, let me get some books sent to you. So, you know, and unfortunately I had to do the Jeff Bezos thing, because then I can get the books sent to her. So I picked out some books for her. And actually, here's what I picked out, and then I think that's probably enough for answering that question. The books by Susan Howard, the Starbridge series, they were written, she started writing them, I mean, she doesn't write them anymore. So it was about 25, 30 years ago. And here's what I liked about her as a writer. She was able to take something that's quite intellectual as a concept and weave it in and create commercial fiction. Really, and with great wit and great literary prowess, I would say. And basically they're about the Church of England. Now you'd think that would be as, well, I hate to say it, but you think it'd be as boring as
as dry as possible.
Oh no, but it's not. There are all these really interesting characters, and you can really get into the books. But what I love is, and people have studied her at universities and things like that because of the depth of research, the depth of intellectual rigor, and then she writes a blockbuster with it. And I think that's something to aspire to. And I think, and then I think with all of the money that she made on those books, she a chair of some kind of theology was created at Cambridge University.
Oh wow!
She endowed a chair. That's it. She endowed. That's the word I'm looking for.
Well, so that actually leads quite well to the next question by Elizabeth Bell, and then let's get some more, guys. Give me 2 more questions. There are 47 of you here. We can muster a few more. Don't be shy. Elizabeth Bell says, what are your favorite places, such as libraries and museums, to go for research into 1914 to 1945 period?
Well,
your personal life, if people are reading this, she's done the research, she's done the groundwork, she's lived it through this generational connection.
Yeah, I often, as I say in the book, you know, one of my friends, was actually, while I was writing, said to me, do you feel that you're a child of the 50s and 60s? And I said, well, actually, I feel that I've more in common with an Edwardian child because of where I was born and how I was raised and so on. But I mean, one of the places that I've always veered towards is the Imperial War Museum in London. And not just to look around at the exhibits, but, and I think they've changed the archive now, so it's probably in a different place, but it used to be in the archive was in the sort of the library, which is in the Dome. The Imperial War Museum, by the way, is actually housed in what used to be part of the Bethlehem Lunatic Asylum. So you've heard of Bedlam? That's the local dialect for Bethlehem.
Oh,
and the Dome was the chapel. And what I would be doing there is reading not just through books or whatever, but reading through archived letters. And they have thousands of archived letters and collections that people have donated when they found them under the bed after someone's died or something. So I love that, going back into history through the words of other people through their observations and so on. So that's one place. But then it really depends what I'm after, because I already have what I would call inventory. I have a lot of inventory in terms of my understanding of the period. So usually it's what do I need to know to write this story that I don't already know. And actually, and I don't want to take too much time with this, when I wrote Maisie Dobbs, I was actually recovering from a pretty horrific horseback riding accident. And I knew it was going to take months. There was a lot of broken stuff and a lot of internal hardware. You've been there. And I really wanted something to show for myself after 6 months of not doing anything. But I couldn't write with my right hand, so I could only write with my left hand.
Wow.
And I'm not very good at writing my left hand. So what I did, I put those big poster-sized Post-it notes on the wall, big felt tip pen. On one, I kept track of my characters. On the other, I did literally an arc of the story. And on the other, it was things I don't know that I need to know. And I would list them as I went along, because I knew I'd have to go back or I'd have to delve into that in the evening. And I still do it that way. So it's, what do I need to know? Do I need to know something about London transport? Then, you know, I can go, you know, if I'm in London, I can go to the London Transport Museum and I'll do things to have the experience of it. One of the photographs at the opening of the book is actually my parents on the Kent and East Sussex Railway, which is a steam a vintage steam service. It's bottom right-hand corner. And I'd taken them for lunch on the steam train service through sort of Kent. It's lovely. Big plug for the Kent and East Sussex Railway. Yeah, it's that one down the bottom. And it was really interesting because I wore a long white jacket that day. And as the train came in, I thought, remember this. If you wear white on a railway station near a steam train, you're going to end up with little black smuts all over it. I would have forgotten that, you know, I would not have known it. So that is something that gives a sense of place. So I give myself these experiences, you know, and without giving too much away about not the next book, but the one after that, I really, I have to find my courage to do this. I really want to go up in a Spitfire, and you can do it, but you see, I'm not the best flyer. And I said to my husband, I might pluck up courage to do it, but I'll have to say to the pilot, no looping the loop. No victory rolls. Let's just do the flying bit and then land.
Yeah.
But we have to.
That would be great, though.
And that is so. How do I feel in this? Because I love reading. Again, I watch documentaries, I read memoirs, and one of the things that I loved about one of the women pilots in World War II, the Air Transport Auxiliary, it was just, I think she passed away about a year ago or so, and she was talking about her experiences flying, and women had to fly any aircraft that were put in front of them. It wasn't like, you know, they had more flying miles than most of the RAF guys. Mind you, it's because a lot of the RAF guys died. And there she was, she said, the thing about the Spitfire was that she was a lady in the air and a bitch on the ground. I just love that. I mean, it's the way she said, lady in the air and a bitch on the ground.
So good.
So anyway, it's experiences as well.
I mean, it sounds like you're a reporter of fiction, which is a fascinating way to process it. I love that, because it's what I do with a different end product. We have two questions that are similar, one for me and one for you, which is, can you talk a little bit about this next book? Because I think people are pre-ordering it today, right?
I think so, yeah.
The one that's coming out. And then the same question for me about what my next project is. So I'll let you answer first.
Okay, the next book comes out at the end of March, and it's called The Consequences of Fear. And I'm not going to tell people too much about it, you know, except that it opens in October 1941, and it ends a couple of months later. And if you know your history, you'll know what it covers. That's all. And as they say, that's all I'm going to say about that. That's what is it? Forrest Gump. That's all I'm going to say about that. But there are some big developments throughout for well-loved characters.
And then the same question was for me. What's my next project? I actually just came back this morning. I haven't slept since yesterday, believe it or not, because I took the red eye and I didn't rest on the red eye. So I've been up since 6 a.m. yesterday from California, where I was with the great horse whisperer Monty Roberts on his ranch, who is 85 years old and still teaching his nonviolent principles around the world alongside Queen Victoria, his patron. And he and I are working on a project together.
I wish I'd known. I'm not far away from there right now.
Oh,
I'm only about, yeah. He's up in the Santa Ynez Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But man, he is a legend. He did some wild spins on horses that, I mean, I couldn't do. 85 years old, and he tells endless stories, and he's lived such a great and humane life. So I'm excited to work on.
I'm envious.
I'm envious of me. It was a very pinch me experience, you know.
Oh wow,
I
that's
slept in his
terrific.
house, and it was just all his buckles and awards, his knighthood from the Queen for his work with animals. And then the last question I'm going to ask you, because a lot of people have asked it, and I'm being mean by not asking it. They want a TV series of Maisie.
That's not up to me. That's up to someone else somewhere. The books have been optioned several times, but you know, there's, as my mum used to say, there's many a slip twixt cup and lip, and you know, it just depends on someone else. And gosh, if I had $1 for every time someone asked me that question, I'd be buying another horse. You know, but you know, as you know, I mean, it's not me that makes that decision. It's someone else has to come along and make me an offer I can't refuse.
Well, if you need my help strong arming anyone, I'm in.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you for this beautiful chat. I think we heard a lot and learned a lot, and the book is tremendous. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you. And I've got to say, I just loved your book. I loved I've actually bought it for several people, including my trainer.
So you don't understand. Me saying I like your book is like, okay, this girl who writes like your book. You saying you like my book is like, I got to call my mom and tell her that.
No, Sarah, it was wonderful. And I've got to tell you, I know someone wants to shut me up now, but I mean, I love so many of the stories. But I loved the story of you galloping along in India. Oh, I could just see it in my mind's eye. And then I think, was it Trendsetter, that story about how you fell and the horse deliberately goes the other way so he won't injure you.
Yeah, that he injured himself so as not to crush me. Yeah, they're special. That connection
like that, and it's unbelievable. But I love that story and all your horse stories, and that amazing connection with a horse, which I think you have to have it to know how it feels here.
Yeah.
Which is, it's just, anyway.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate
it. Thank you.
I'm Kim Bissell, one of the other owner at Broadway Books, and I just want to say a huge thank you to both Sarah and Jackie. What a wonderful, wonderful conversation this has been. And to thank all of you for attending tonight's reading with Jacqueline Winspear and Sarah Maslin. We truly appreciate their time and yours. Once again, just thank you everyone for coming tonight. We encourage you all to shop early and local. Thank you, Sarah, for your holiday needs. And we wish everybody a wonderful, wonderful evening. This was just delightful, and lots of chats coming through right now saying how delightful this was.
And I think there is a special deal that you're offering if you buy both our books.
There is. If you buy both these books, you get a little bit off, and the two of them are together are $50, which is a good little deal for whoever.
That's a great deal.
We're honored, so honored that both of you agreed to do this. Sally fell off and is back on again now, so I know she's listening too, and we've recorded this, so anyone who had troubles getting on or who would like a link to the recording, we will be sending that out as well to all the attendees. So thank you guys so much again. And
thank you from me too.
Yes, happy holidays to you all.
I'm back on.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.